So you want to start composting, but you're not exactly sure where to begin. Do you need a fancy tumbler, or can you just use a pile? Will it smell like sewage like my neighbor's does? What is the proper ratio of browns to greens? And how much moisture should it get? When I first started composting, I had no idea what I was doing, mostly because I had no clue what a brown or a green was. And my tumbler system smelt like a full-on sewage facility. But I kept at it. I learned from my mistakes, and now I make beautiful, healthy compost for my garden every season. Today, I'm going to show you all the things that I wish I knew when I started so that you can skip all the nasty mistakes and go straight to success. By the end, you'll know where to keep your pile, how to keep it balanced, and when it's ready to use. I'm Sunny from Sunnyside Soil. Let's get to it. So the first thing that you want to do is find a spot for your compost. You want to make sure that it's out of the way so you're not tripping over it. You want to make sure that it won't be an eyesore because it can get ugly. And you want to make sure that it's in the shade, because if the sun is consistently beating down on it, it could dry out your pile, and that will stop the decomposting process. So there are a million different ways that you can start a compost pile. I'm going to go over the two easiest ways because this is a beginner compost video. And the two easiest ways are a pile or a tumbler. Now the pile, you can either put it on the ground, straight on the ground. Personally, I like to put it on a pallet. That just raises it up off the ground, and any excess moisture that it collects will seep down below the pallet. Now, the number one pro of having an open pile is by far the affordability of it. It's free to just throw it on the ground, and if you decide to put it on a pallet, you can ask most stores and they'll give you one for free. The other pro of an open pile is that you're not limited to a certain size. You can make it as big as you want and have as much compost as you are willing to make. Now, the cons of the open pile method: it's not very pretty to look at. So if you throw a lot of garden parties, then you might want to choose a different method. The other con to the open pile method is that from all the different composting methods, this one is the most likely to attract pests. So if you have a lot of rats or mice in your area, you might want to choose a different method. But if you want a method that's affordable and you plan on making a lot of compost, this is the way to go. So your second beginner-friendly option is the tumbler bin, and honestly this is how I first started making my compost until I decided that I needed to make more compost. The pros of the bin is that it's a lot prettier to look at, so you can kind of tuck it away into any corner of your yard. Also, it's an enclosed system, so you're a lot less likely to get critters into it. The cons are the price. Some of your least expensive tumblers start at $50 and go up from there. Another con to the tumbler system is the maintenance of it. They say that you have to spin this at least once a week to keep air flowing through it. And then the final con is that this hole can be a pain to dig your compost out of. So really, the choice is up to you. If you don't want to look at your pile, I would go with the tumbler. If you decide that you need to make a lot of compost, I would go with the open pile. So it doesn't matter which system you use, the concept of making compost is the same. You can't just throw food scraps in and expect there to be perfect compost. You need to have a balance of carbons and nitrogens. Now, you might have heard the term browns and greens. I prefer carbons to nitrogens, and that's only because there are some brown material that are actually full of nitrogen, like manure and coffee grounds. And because of that, the term browns and greens always confused me. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to use carbon to nitrogen. So the ratio that I like is 2/3 carbon to 1/3 nitrogen. Here's a list of good carbons to add to your pile: wood chips, shredded cardboard, dried dead leaves, and dead dry plant material. A good way to tell if it's dry enough to be called a carbon is if you bend it and it snaps right away, then it's become a carbon. And here's a list of good nitrogen material: any vegetable scrap, any fruit scrap, cut grass, coffee grounds, and alive plant matter. Now, a couple of notes on the alive plant matter. It's best if you can cut it up into small pieces, just because it'll break down faster. And since this is a beginning compost pile, you're probably never going to get it hot enough, and so you don't want to add weeds to your pile. You don't want to add anything that has seeds with it. When I first started composting, I made the mistake of throwing mulberries into my compost bin, and those seeds did not die. So the next year, when I spread that compost throughout my garden, I had mulberry bushes growing everywhere. It was a mess. You also don't want to put any meat or dairy in your compost pile. Not that it won't break down, it will eventually, but before it breaks down, it'll attract flies and pests, which just add a mess. So here's a pro tip. If you are beginning to compost to get rid of your food scraps from your kitchen, here's an easy, quick way of doing it. You can fill a 5-gallon bucket 3/4 of the way full of carbon. So remember, carbon is your wood chips, your shredded cardboard, your straw. And then you can add your nitrogen, so your food scraps, your vegetable scraps, your fruit scraps, on top of the carbon until it's full. Once it's full, you can transfer this bucket and dump it into your compost pile. I know that's a lot of information, and if it would be easier for you to see it written down, I have created a compost knowledge one sheet that if you click on the link below, I will send you that PDF. And if you like what you're seeing and want to support the channel, the best way to do that is actually to buy some of our worms or worm castings or the super fun t-shirt. You can do that in the links below as well. All right, so let's start building a pile. Remember, I like to use a pallet to build a pile, and that's just so that to let any excess moisture seep out of the pile. But before I do that, I'm gonna add weed barrier cloth on top of the pallet, and that's just so that the compost doesn't fall through the slats. All right, I'm gonna staple. So if you followed the pro tip and did the bucket method, that it was 3/4 carbon and 1/4 food scraps, you can just go ahead and dump that on here now. If you prefer to have one of these countertop pails, then you fill this up with food scraps, dump it on the pile, and then add 3 more of these with carbon. I like to put the food scraps down first and then cover it with the carbon material. That just keeps the flies away. So now let's talk about moisture. And this is probably the biggest mistake that my clients make when they're building their own compost pile, is that their compost is not wet enough. In addition to carbon and nitrogen, the other 2 things that you need is air and water. So water is a key component in breaking down your compost. A healthy compost pile, when you squeeze it, should feel like a damp sponge. So we need to water this pile. So you want to check back on your pile about once a week. If it's too dry, then you want to continue to water it. If it's too wet, then just skip the watering for that week. So when you're not actively working on your pile, you want to cover it with a tarp. And this has a multitude of reasons. One, it keeps the moisture in so it doesn't dry out as fast. It keeps the sun out, again, so it won't dry out. And it keeps the rain from soaking it too much. So there's a huge argument about how often you should be turning your compost. Some people say that you have to turn it once a month, and that does aerate the pile and helps it break down faster. But as a beginning gardener, that can feel overwhelming. So Since you're just starting out, I would say turn it just once somewhere throughout the process. It won't break down as quickly, but it won't feel so overwhelming. Now that's for a compost pile. If you're using a tumbler, they do say that you should spin that tumbler at least once a week. So when do you stop adding to your pile? If you've got the tumbler system, then that's pretty easy to figure out. When your tumbler is full, stop adding to it. If you're using the pile system, then you need to kind of do a calculation in your head about how much compost do you need to fill up your garden. At some point, enough is enough, otherwise you'll never be finished with your pile. So you've stopped adding to the pile, but how do you know when it's done? Because it is going to take time to cure. Well, it's finished when it looks like good quality soil with maybe a few sticks left in it. There's certainly no recognizable food left. But what do you do if your compost is ready, but you're not ready to spread it yet? Like it's the winter time. Well, don't fret because it'll store just fine. Keep it covered, keep it out of the sun, keep it out of the elements, like covered with a tarp. Just make sure that it stays moist throughout the winter. All right, you've made this beautiful compost, but now what do you do with it? Well, you can spread it as a topsoil on your garden beds. You can use it as a great boost for your seed starter mix, or you can put it in your potted plants. Really, anywhere that plants grow, compost is gold for it. So one of the #1 things that could go wrong as a beginner composter is that your bin starts smelling like sewage or like vomit. And that's whether you're doing the on the ground pile or in the tumbler. And the reason for that is because you're either adding too much nitrogen or too much water and the pile has gone anaerobic, which is basically a fancy way of saying that there's no more oxygen in it. But the solution is pretty simple. You just add more carbon and either spin that tumbler a few more times or give that pile a good turning. Okay, so now you know how to make compost, but how do you know how much you need to use for your space? Let's say that you have a raised bed that's 8 feet long and 3 feet wide. I would suggest that you put 2 inches of compost every season into that raised bed. So we have to do some calculating. You times 8 times 3 to get your square footage, and then you times that number by 2 inches. And then you divide that number by 324. And this will get you how many yards of compost you need. We make the calculation in yards only because most compost is sold on a yard scale. But what does that mean for your compost pile? Well, 1 yard equals 3 feet wide by 3 feet long by 3 feet deep. So 1 yard, 1 cubic yard is 3 feet cubed. So that's the beginner guide to composting. Whether you start with the tumbler or the pile system, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just get started. And if you think that you've graduated to the intermediate level and would like to see that video, then leave a comment below.